Hey guys, it's Shaylin. I'm here today with another episode of Recent Reads. This is the series where I talk about the last 10 books that I read. Normally on this channel I talk about writing, but I do love a read. I do love a book. This is where I just ramble about books that I read. Kind of trying to do it from a writer's perspective and see what we can maybe learn about writing craft from these books, but ultimately it's just my thoughts, my opinions, because I do have those sometimes. We're starting off with a collection, Ayiti by Roxanne Gay. It's actually a crime that I haven't read Roxanne Gay. I especially love her book reviews. Nobody reviews a book like Roxanne Gay reviews a book. Sometimes I'll ramble about a book for like 10 minutes in one of these videos and she'll just concisely but like so poetically say exactly what I was trying to articulate but spend 10 minutes stumbling over. You are the prophet of contemporary literature. This is a unique collection because many of the stories are very, very short, essentially flash fiction. It's not your typical short story collection where you're getting 8 to 12, 15 to 20 page stories. You're getting a lot of really little brief moments sprinkled throughout there. I find often in a short story collection, I'm drawn to the shorter pieces. I don't know where I read this. A long time ago, I remember reading an essay by, maybe it was George Saunders, but it could have been someone completely different, who said that short fiction is about compression as an aesthetic. I feel like Roxanne Gay really understands the aesthetic of compression. As a reader, she can clearly hone in on the heart and also faults of a book in just a couple sentences. She does that just as well in her own stories. With the writing is very direct and very precise, and so you don't need 20 pages. Sometimes you only need one, and she does in one page what many writers might attempt to do in 20, and she does it better because she understands the power of that precision. So the next book I picked up was Sweetbitter by Stephanie Danler. I'd honestly been in a reading slump. I'd been struggling to get through books. A friend of mine who used to work in a bookstore had told me that this was her go-to recommendation for something that has like really nice writing but it's still really easy to read. I have really mixed feelings on this. So I really liked the artsy prose. The overall tone and atmospheric hazy quality, just everything stylistic about this book. Oh, I didn't say what this is about. So this was also adapted to a show, so you might be familiar with it from that. We follow 22-year-old Tess, which first of all, weird that she's named. We don't find out her name till like halfway through the book, and it's weird. That's my take. She should have been a nameless narrator. Anyways, she moves from like a small town in the Midwest to New York City. She kind of stumbles ass backwards into a job at like a really, really fancy restaurant. Kind of just like a year of her life. There were a lot of interesting moments that you could read kind of just like as vignettes that add up together to create her life. I thought Tess was a bizarre character. In her narrative, she's perceptive and intelligent. Her narrative is so compelling. The artistic quality of the prose, the rhythmic quality of the prose. In her actions and her dialogue, she's so dumb. Like, I've never read a character where I feel like there's such a discrepancy between how she acts externally and how she is internally, because internally, she's really intelligent and she's really perceptive. As soon as she opens her mouth and says anything, she sounds like an idiot. Her actions don't reflect any kind of intelligence. I took away something kind of interesting related to the book that I'm writing right now, because there are some conceptual similarities. I mean, it's a common plot line. Young woman moves to big city from rural place, wants to find herself. What I learned about that plotline from this book is that it's not a powerful narrative if we don't have enough backstory to support why it's important to the main character. You know, from Tess, we get a lot of abstract desire from her about how she wants to become a person. But what I learned here is that it doesn't really work if there's no concrete backing to understand why the character feels such a longing to become a person or why they don't feel like one yet. I didn't get really any sense of her backstory to understand why this was such a transformative narrative for her. These desires that she had weren't supported by anything. We were just presented with her desires and she had them, and we were kind of being asked to just buy that they were important to her. So then I read a book that I did really enjoy, A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt. So my roommates actually bought this for me for my birthday. I have said that I really like prose written by poets because I feel like poets bring an extra spice to prose writing that fiction writers don't bring. Like, I'm gonna say it, poets write better fiction than fiction writers. It had to be said. So this is actually Billy Ray Belcourt's memoir. This is a formatively playful set of musings on Belcourt's experiences, intersectional experiences, being both queer and indigenous. And I loved the interplay of forms here. You know, there's essay, personal anecdote, and also honestly just poetry. Like, some parts are just poetry, and those are my favorite parts. I was enamored by especially the poetic sections of this, and I need more of his poetic voice. The formal looseness of it made me feel like I was reading a giant poem. Rather than reading the poem, I'd zoomed in, so I was like spending more time walking through every line. There's a poem and been shrunken in scale to the poem. That doesn't make sense. I thought that the formal playfulness lended an intimacy to this narrative. You can just tell that he's a poet structurally and linguistically. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. The form, the language, It's solidified why I think poets are the best prose writers. All of us prose writers should just quit and we should hand over the world of literature to the poets, except we can't do that because they're chaotic. I'm sorry, poets. I said it. There were just a number of points where I felt like his light touch and his brevity left me wanting. He would say something, like he would drop a line so good and so compelling that I was like, wait, I kind of need more to really understand this idea that you're presenting, because maybe it's something that I hadn't thought of before. He would kind of move on and I'd be like, wait, Billy, I need a little more of that. But yeah, this was really great. I'm really, really excited to dive into his poetry. Speaking of poetry, then I read some poetry. So this book is Rabbit by Sophie Robinson. My roommate lent this to me, so I need to return it. When I review poetry, I usually just read the summary rather than trying to explain what it's about in my own words, because I'm really bad at concisely telling you what poetry is about. So, the long-awaited third collection from one of the UK's finest, most virtuistic of modern lyric poets. These poems take the reader on surprising journeys of healing, hard-won amid personal and social vicissitudes. I don't even know how to say that word. You know when you see a word and you're like, I've seen that word, I've never said it out loud before. Including triumph over addiction and alcoholism, and open spaces in which to share in emotional, quasi-spiritual transcendence despite. Really chaotic group of poems, but like not chaotic in the sense of not well edited or well constructed. It's a very technically well-constructed chaos where clearly the poems have had a lot of thought, but she hasn't edited out the chaos, which I really appreciated. I love a chaotic poem. A lot of lack of punctuation, you know, she doesn't use capital letters at any point. And so you really feel like you're just being whirled along through the frenetic quality of her thoughts, and it's quite impactful, so I really enjoyed this. So then we have All About Sarah by Pauline Delabroy-Allard. This, I believe, was translated from French. I think it was like a big thing in France. So this book follows a teacher who's also a single mother, and then she meets Sarah. The two of them begin a very intense, passionate love affair that is both of their first queer relationship, and it's told through brief little vignette moments, which is what I was looking for. I was looking for some gay vignettes because my novel is just a bunch of gay vignettes. So that's why I picked this up, because I was looking for the gay vignettes. I don't know, the desire that they have for each other is so strong that it's almost like violent, but like deeply loving. So it's a very intense relationship. The prose rhythms and the atmospheric quality of the writing was great. You know, this is set in like Paris. The style really mirrors the experience of the relationship that they have and how powerful it is. Sarah is a much more vivid character. The main character, I don't really know who she is outside of her love for and attraction to Sarah. She's a mother. Her kid is barely mentioned. Now, part of this may have been intentional. It was like, okay, she's so caught up in this love affair that she's like neglecting her child. I felt like I didn't even feel the presence of the child on the page or in the story, that I completely forgot there was a child. The second half is wildly different from the first half. The first half, there's not really a cohesive plot. Like, the story's not really working towards any kind of goal or endpoint. It's just a capturing of this relationship, and to be honest, I was happy with that. They were being chaotically gay in Paris. I didn't need more. I didn't need a plot. I didn't even need a goal. It was being captured linguistically in an interesting way, and I was on board. Something happens in the middle of the book that did not feel earned. It's written in the same stylistic way, but it's like a completely different book. Emotionally, it gets dark. I felt like the second half was just circling the same points over and over. Like in the first half, even though it wasn't really working towards anything concrete, it felt like progression forward. The second half just felt like it was constantly circling around the same information that we already knew. And it was all built off the back of a really tragic event that, to me, wasn't earned. If this book had been just its first half, and then the first half had reached some kind of end point, I would have been completely satisfied with that, and I probably would have given it a 4 or higher star rating. But because of the second half that I wasn't really into, and just felt like a derailment, I left the book much less enamored than when I began. So then I picked up Red Island House by Andrea Lee. So this book follows the main character, Shay. Liked her from the beginning. She's a Black American professor, and she marries an Italian businessman named Senna. And so he has this dream where he wants to build like a big fancy vacation home in Madagascar. And so the book kind of follows their relationship as it takes place in this guest house. And the vibes are just kind of weird, like especially for Shay being a Black woman, there's a big colonial vibe to this, you know, what Senna is doing here. It's almost like a short story collection, but not really. Like it's a novel, but kind of a short story collection in that it's a bunch of individual stories set on the island, but they are subtly blended together. The sense of place, beautifully realized, which was one of the things that I was really hoping for from this book. Loved it. The writing is immersive and atmospheric and sensory. I really struggled to understand the relationship between Shay and Senna. Shay as a character I thought was well rendered and interesting and subtle and compelling. I did not understand her relationship with Senna. Now the narrative is a little distant, I would say, but we're still mostly in Shay's point of view. The narrative, and it's her narrative, is pretty critical of him, and rightfully critical, because he's a colonizer. Every single time the narrative would speak of him in a very aptly critical way, well, I was like, yes, like get his ass. But also, I really struggled to understand why she was with him. She is a beautiful, successful, intelligent woman, and he's just a mediocre man who is also a colonizer. Like, let's just not forget that bit. Shay, I get the sense of her as a person that she's very perceptive of people and very compassionate. Those things combine to make her very, very good at reading people. So she's reading her husband, really seeing him and everything that's weird about this situation and his little colonial fantasy that he's playing out here. Like, I don't get the sense that she's the type of person who would not pick up on all the weird nuances of this situation and then just put up with them. Just didn't seem accurate to what I was getting from her as a character. I didn't really understand why she was with him. I didn't understand their attraction. I didn't understand their compatibility. There is a moment pretty early on in the book where we're getting some exposition on their relationship and their history, and it's kind of told, like, we're just told why she likes him and why it seems like they wouldn't be a good couple, but it does work. But I never really saw that in any of their interactions. It's such a backbone relationship to the story. There is a decent amount of exposition, and it's a pretty distant narrative. Like, there's a lot of history and context. I liked that. There is a immersive, just tasty quality to the prose. The point where I was the most invested was as we were nearing the end of the first vignette. I didn't actually know that the book was going to be kind of separate stories. I thought it was just one long narrative, and as we were closing in on the end of that first vignette, I was like, oh, I'm in. Like, this is going to be good. It was kind of around page 60, and I was hoping that that would be the launch into the plot, and then it was actually just like the closing of that one narrative. So mixed feelings on this. Lots of really great things going, a few things that I think I needed to be more convinced by. So then I picked up Writers and Lovers by Lily King, another aimless young woman being kind of sad and artsy book. I actually liked this a lot more than I even thought that I would, to be honest. This book is set in the 90s. We follow Casey, who is working as a waitress, but she is an aspiring writer. Her trying to make a career as a creative person while in the wake of her mother's sudden death. So normally I think writing about writing is not my favorite thing. I don't really know any writers who like writing about writing. Really the only book about writing that I think is good is Bunny by Mona Awad, and it's just because that book is insane in every conceivable way. This I thought actually worked. You know, it is so much about her artistic journey, how she sees writing. The philosophy on writing was actually really complex and reflective of an actual writer, and so I actually enjoyed the writing about writing, which is something I normally hate. I was convinced that she was a good writer. I liked this book more and more as it went on. At the beginning I was like, okay, like what's the drive, where's the heat? But as it went on, I found myself increasingly impacted by just the moments of her day-to-day life. So in the end I really enjoyed this. I didn't take much away from the side characters. Didn't feel the realness of the side characters that I felt of the main character. So the next book is the one that I'm the most excited to talk about. It's my favorite book I have read so far this year, and my favorite book that I've read in a long time. I think this is my favorite book I've read since Luster by Raven Leilani, and I think I read Luster last August. So it's been a while I've read something that I'm this obsessed with, and it's Lightness by Emily Temple. So this book follows Olivia. It's a retrospective novel, but it takes place when she's a teenager, I think 17, and she goes to this summer meditation retreat for girls. And when she gets there, she meets this trio of girls who are trying to learn how to levitate, and she kind of gets drawn into their little group, and it's so feral. You guys know me, there's nothing I love more than a feral, unhinged teenage girl. Any book where it's like, here's a teenage girl with lethally unhinged emotions, that's what I want. That's my taste in books. First of all, we just have to talk about the writing. Incredible. Just stop you in your tracks detail choices. I don't mark up my books, like I don't write in them, I don't tab them. This book, I wish that I had, because there's so many passages that I want to come back to. I feel like I need to read this again in like a year and tab it. Lines I had to stop and take in, details that felt perfectly chosen. There's a structured playfulness to the writing, and there are a lot of pretty brief scenes, and each one packs a punch. Kind of reminded me actually of Luster by Raven Leilani. I'm starting to learn that this is clearly a structure that really appeals to me, where there are a lot of pretty brief scenes, but each scene really presents something bold. The main character is really interesting. There are a couple points where she seems very aware of an audience, and she'll kind of just say things kind of bluntly, and I actually really appreciated it. You know, it worked in the retrospective. There's a point where it's pretty early on, I don't remember the phrasing exactly, where she says something like, let's just get this out of the way. I'm the type of person where any promise of power will corrupt me. And I was like, girl, I'm here for you and your unhingedness. If you liked The Girls by Emma Cline, this should be your next read. So good. Thank you so much to the person who recommended this to me. You really saw me. Like, you saw me in a way that no one else has ever seen me, and it's like kind of intimate. So then I read Small Beauty by Jia-King Wilson Yang. The main character, May, is a person of mixed and specifically Chinese heritage. She's a trans woman. Her cousin dies suddenly, and so she kind of retreats from the city to go live in like a small town in the countryside in his now empty home. I think the title of this book is really accurate. It is a small beauty. Not just because, you know, it's a pretty short book, and it's pretty beautiful, but also because I feel like everything that happens is smallly beautiful. You know, it's not grandly beautiful, it's smallly beautiful. The prose here is effective and observant and quick. There's a nice, in general, quick pace to the writing, though there are definitely places where I felt that the writing shone and other places where it felt a bit plain. I think my main criticism of this is just that I felt like I didn't know enough concrete about the characters. I didn't really know enough to get a clear sense for who they were as people. It was really effective structurally, like as a book that is kind of about a person's internal wandering as they're receding due to grief, but also opening up in terms of how they're looking at themselves and looking at their life, that being the drive of the story. Really effective. So to close this off, we're just talking about some poetry. So I picked up Saturn Peach by Lily Wang. Like I did with Rabbit, I'm just gonna read the back because I can't explain poetry. In Saturn Peach, Lily Wang establishes a distinctive voice that is part heartbreak and part wise witness, chronically capturing the strange gist of a technologized world. When asked to describe her book, Wang answered in her quintessential way, "There are things I never want to know, but always know. Every day I live with them, every day I live. I am like a young fruit, like a peach, common, not the popular kind, but oblate, Saturn. I live and inside me this pale fruit, yellow and white. I take bites out of myself and share them with you. Maybe you taste like me. Maybe you hold this fruit and become a tree." If ever there were a book that disarmingly and seemingly effortlessly encouraged its reader to become a metaphor, then Saturn Peach is it. I really enjoyed this book. This book captures an intimacy. The language is intentional and so well chosen, but it captures a feeling of a stream of consciousness. And it's something that I feel like poetry does that no other form of writing can really do, where you feel kind of like you've been gifted a bit of an honor to be allowed into the speaker's mind in such an intimate way. This book is really tender. Lily Wang kind of sees the importance of smallness. It's really playful and fun and joyful, but pretty accessible, I'd say. So if you're just getting into poetry, like, definitely check this one out. So that is all I've got for this video. As always, I would love to hear your favorite books you've read recently, so let me know what you've been reading, what you've been loving, or what you've not been loving. If you want to go there, I would be here for a bit of salt. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.